MSNBC is facing backlash for comparing former President Donald Trump's recent Madison Square Garden event to a pro-Nazi rally held at the same New York City venue in 1939 after splicing an 85-year-old footage of the crowd doing Sieg Heil salutes in between clips of the Republican Sunday audience. One of the far-left network's anchors, Jonathan Capehart, called Trump's packed rally chilling because of the German-American Bund's completely unrelated event at the arena. But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen in that place, is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally, Capehart said while rolling black and white footage of Nazi fans. Historian and CNN contributor Ruth Ben-Ghiat concurred with Capehart's comparison, calling the Trump rally an overt Nazi parallel.
Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities.
The segment upset thousands of Trump fans, with several Jewish supporters of the former president saying MSNBC was mocking the Holocaust and diminishing the memory of the millions of Jews who perished during that period.
A different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism.
Journalist Yaakov Strasberg wrote on X, "Please explain to all of us Orthodox Jewish Trump supporters, the vast majority of Orthodox Jews, how it's a Nazi rally." Social media influencer Shane Ginsberg poked fun at the media outlet's claims, writing, "I'm Jewish. I went to the Nazi rally. I'm voting for Trump. Any questions?" Proud Jewish New York Republican Deborah Lee posted a video to X to set the record straight, calling out the mainstream media.
Rally. And that couldn't be further from the truth. There were so many Jews there, just like myself. There was Israeli flags, and nearly every single speaker talked about their commitment to upholding the relationship between U.S. and Israel. Not to mention all the Latinos for Trump, gays for Trump, and nearly every other group that would have never been allowed in if this was actually a Nazi rally. Kamala Harris could literally bring Adolf Hitler on her stage, and the mainstream media still wouldn't call it a Nazi rally. Their lies are futile. Trump is winning this election in 9 days. Make sure you get out, vote early, and vote for Donald Trump.
While on the vice presidential campaign trail, Minnesota Gov. Tim Walz D also compared Trump's rally to the 1939 Nazi event, telling his supporters in Las Vegas, Nevada, to Google it on Sunday. Breitbart News fact-checked these desperate Nazi comparisons and claims coming out of the Democrat camp, noting that Jewish people have also held anti-Nazi rallies at Madison Square Garden. The Trump War Room also pointed out that the Democrat national conventions were held at Madison Square Garden several times throughout the decades.
History professor at New York University and author of Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present. Anne Applebaum, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, staff writer at The Atlantic, and author of Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. I cannot wait to have this conversation with both of you. And Ruth, thank you both very much for being here. Ruth, since you are not at the table, let me start with you and just talk to us about the parallels that we're seeing between 1939, that rally at Madison Square Garden, and the rally we're seeing right now at Madison Square Garden, and the rhetoric that's already coming out of this rally.
Yeah, of course, this is not a casual choice to have it there. And although Donald Trump objects strenuously to people comparing him to Hitler, he is the one who has gone out of his way to use Nazi rhetoric, talking about polluting our blood, calling people vermin, even releasing a campaign ad that says he's going to create a unified Reich in America. And of course, as General Kelly said, complaining that, generals should be obeying him like Hitler's generals obeyed the Fuhrer. So this is not at all casual. I want to make a comment about what Von Hilliard was talking about. Trump has been using his rallies since 2015 to radicalize people, to incite violence, to kind of loosen people's inhibitions against violence. And all of the racist stereotypes against Latinos and blacks and misogynist stereotypes and all of the vulgarity and the crudeness is designed to help people lose their inhibitions and their taboos against inciting, against committing violence if the leader asks them to.
And, Anne, you write exactly this point. In your latest piece in The Atlantic, why does Trump sound like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini? And you walk us through what Mussolini used to say, what Stalin used to say, what Hitler used to say, and then you bring up things that Donald Trump has said, including they're poisoning the blood of our country, they're destroying the blood of our country. Bad genes, they're not humans, they're animals, cold-blooded killers, the enemy from within, sick, radical left lunatics. And you say he knows exactly what he's doing when he does this.
So a couple of points to make about it. One is this isn't language that's been part of mainstream American politics before. When I was writing that article, I went back and looked at a few other eras in the last century to see if I could find anybody talking about vermin or poisoning the blood or comparing political enemies to insects. And I couldn't find it. I mean, even George Wallace's horrific racist speech that he made in 1963, where he's segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, he doesn't use that kind of language. This is language that is deliberately being imported and used knowingly by Trump and by others around him, including at this rally. It's also interesting that normally at this point in a campaign, a candidate would be going to the center. I mean, he would be looking for, swing voters, for, people in the middle, people who are trying to make up their minds. But it looks to me, and this echoes a little bit what Ruth just said, that what Trump is trying to do is radicalize people who don't usually vote to reach some kind of, latent, angry, maybe racist, maybe violent segment of society that doesn't usually turn out for elections. And that would just be my guess as to what he's doing, because this, and particularly this rally, is using a kind of extremism that we're not used to certainly in the last 2 weeks of U.S. presidential campaign.
Ruth, to Anne's point, he's using this rhetoric to get these folks, to get them out to vote. I just wonder, is he also doing this to get them to go the next step? And that is to incite violence, to have them do violence if he doesn't win?
Yeah, I believe so. He does need them to vote, but as we well know from all the GOP senators and congressmen who refuse to commit to accepting the results of a free and fair election, the GOP is now an autocratic party for the most part that is dependent on election denial, the big lie that they still won't refute Trump, idea that he won the 2020 election.
Ruth, let me stop you there for 1 second, because just taking the stage right now is someone who fosters that notion that Donald Trump didn't lose the 2020 election. His vice presidential running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, who is now taking the podium. Not sure we're going to take this, but Ruth, finish your response.
Yeah, now I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, Ruth.
That's okay.
Get your train of thought back, and I'm gonna come to Anne. Anne, if you want to pick up on what Ruth was talking about. In fact, let me read something you wrote also in this Atlantic piece that actually mentions Ruth. There was a rally that Trump did where he stood in front of a huge slogan, "Trump was right about everything." And you write, this is language borrowed directly from Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist. Soon after the rally, the scholar Ruth Ben-Ghiat posted a photograph of a building in Mussolini's Italy displaying his slogan, "Mussolini is always right."
So this indicates to me that people around Trump are deliberately echoing this language, that this is part of their game, that for whatever reasons, whether it's to get out the vote or whether it's to prepare people to commit acts of violence after they lose the election, I don't know. But they do know what they're doing. They're not making accidental allusions to the 1930s. You don't do that by accident or by mistake.
Right. And Ruth, I'm just wondering, to Anne's point, I mean, we've never seen this before in American politics. We've never heard this language from the top levels of American politics. I'm just wondering, can we as a nation pull back from the brink that we're hanging off of?
We can certainly hope so, that this exacerbation of extremism will wake people up, those who still think it can't happen here, and get them to see the GOP and Donald Trump as in an authoritarian frame, whatever that means to them, because this is a party that has exited democracy. It no longer believes in the norms and practices and values of democracy, which is why January 6th happened and why the GOP passed a resolution in 2022 that said that January 6th was, quote, legitimate political discourse. They now think that violence is a legitimate way to solve political problems. And that's what Trump has been doing at his rallies, trying to get people to see violence and racism and misogyny as legitimate political discourse. So I'm hoping that this overt Nazi parallels that they are cultivating and this extremism will wake people up and get them to see that it's not just going to be immigrants. It's going to be a very wide range of targets, as you see from the other speeches. They targeted many, many Americans. And I'm hoping people will see the danger.